Welcome to the Tao of Our Understanding Recovery Podcast. In this podcast, we discuss mystical works of literature and how they relate to recovery. We hope you enjoy today's podcast episode.
Hello, this is Buddy C. Welcome to the Tao of Our Understanding Recovery Podcast. Today we have Lori and Brian and Drew. Good to have you guys. We will be discussing the 61st verse of the Tao Te Ching. If you're new to the podcast, we discuss how the Tao Te Ching relates to our own recovery. We're all in 12-step recovery of some kind, I believe. And we have found this text to really speak to us about the higher power. Now, I've been accused of being a Taoist. I am not a Taoist. I don't think anyone here is, quote, a Taoist. You don't have to turn in your Jesus card or your, would it be an Allah card? I don't know. But you don't have to do any of that. I have found that this text, which was written 2,500 or so years ago, fits perfectly with my beliefs of a loving higher power, a loving God. And it really helps me to apply really a practical application of spirituality. I think that's a real good way to say it. That's really what it's done for me. I do want to make sure I mention different resources that we have, and I'll just mention one a week. One I have not mentioned lately is a daily devotion that I've been fortunate enough to start penning. You can sign up at buddyc.org. It's free. There's no, the list is kept private. I don't sell that to anyone or any of those type things. It's buddyc.org. Other things there too. I was just going to mention one. Eventually I'm writing it now. It hasn't even been to the editor yet, so you'll see some mistakes as I go along. I will publish that in a daily devotional book eventually. But you're welcome to use that now if you would like. Okay, the 61st verse of the Tao Te Ching. Brian, you want to read us Derek Lynn first?
Sure. The large country is like the lowest river, the converging point of the world, the receptive female of the world. The female always overcomes the male with serenity, using serenity as the lower position. Thus, if the large country is lower than the small country, then it can take the small country. If the small country is lower than the large country, then it can be taken by the large country. Thus, one uses the lower position to take. The other uses the lower position to be taken. The large country only wishes to gather and protect people. The small country only wishes to join and serve people, so that both can obtain what they wish. The larger one should assume the lower position.
Thank you, Brian.
You're welcome.
Laurie, you have Jonathan Starr, I believe.
Yes. 61, right?
Yes, ma'am.
A great state is like a river basin that receives everything flowing into it. It is the place where all things come to rest, where all the world is welcomed. The low is greater than the high, the still is greater than the restless. The low country wins over its neighbor. The still female wins over the male. The sage wants to uplift the people. The people want to follow the sage. Only by being low does this come to be. The sage bows to the people bow to the sage. And when they lift up their heads, only greatness remains.
Thank you, Laurie. Drew, you want to read a Stephen Mitchell?
Sure. When a country obtains great power, it becomes like the sea. All streams run downward into it. The more powerful it grows, the greater the need for humility. Humility means trusting the Tao, thus never needing to be defensive. A great nation is like a great man. When he makes a mistake, he realizes it. Having realized it, he admits it. Having admitted it, he corrects it. He considers those who point out his faults as his most benevolent teachers. He thinks of his enemy as the shadow that he himself casts. If a nation is centered in the Tao, if it nourishes its own people and doesn't meddle in the affairs of others, it will be a light to all nations in the world.
Thank you. Any comments?
I know how hard it is to consider those who point out my faults as my most benevolent teachers. That's hard.
That's one of my favorite quotes.
Me too.
There's a progression here too. If we back up, I think the only way that we can do what's in the latter part of the second stanza there, Drew, is if we do what's in the first stanza.
Mm-hmm.
When a country obtains great power, it becomes like the sea. All streams run downward into it. The more powerful it grows, the greater the need for humility. Humility means trusting the Tao, thus never needing to be defensive. There's another example of humility that talks about the greater the body of water, the lower it is, and the more it gives back. I think of Craig every time we talk about this. What's it called?
It's the water cycle, isn't it?
Yeah, I thought it was. I always think it's something more than that.
I think you were thinking, is it hydrological?
That's what I was thinking. Yes,
I remember that show, and y'all were going back and forth.
Yeah, I always think about that, so I can't think of anything when I started thinking about it. Yes, the water cycle. Thank you. Yeah, and it makes sense that the greater the body of water, obviously the lower it's going to be, because the other rivers and streams run in, and the greater it is, the more it gives back. The more evaporation there is, and the more rain that falls out of as a result, and it keeps giving back continually to the rest of the world. So that's a process of humility, that the greater, the more giving. And for me, if I'm looking at the greater the need for humility, it's almost that humility's thrust upon it. For the greater body of water not to give back, it would have to fight against what is natural, right? I mean, you'd have to do something to prevent it. If you don't prevent it, it's going to give back. It's the natural thing to do for the lake, ocean, whatever it is we're talking about. It's going to give back, and the bigger it is, the more it's going to naturally give back. And that's a picture of humility for me. Thus, never needing to be defensive. I don't see how that fits. You guys have any suggestions?
Yes.
To me, the defensiveness is focusing on myself and keeping everything focused on me, not giving back, not nourishing everyone regardless of who they are. The water cycle, like you were talking about, rain falls on everybody equally. The good, the bad, the oppressed, the oppressors, everyone. So that's what humility is treating everyone as you would want to be treated, treating everyone with honesty and kindness. And not like defensiveness is the opposite of honesty, but you can be honest and defensive, but what are your intentions? Your intentions are self-preservation, protecting yourself. And if an ocean wants to preserve itself by never giving anything up, then the water cycle ends and everything ends up not being nourished and withering. So everything can grow when the ocean stops being defensive.
Thank you, Drew. Lori?
I love this line the way it's different than the other translations. So this hit me big time because what I've noticed, just even thinking about dealing with people who trigger me is I put on this defensive mode. And the defending is me defending what? What am I defending? I'm defending that I know better and I look good and I'm right. So I dig this. This makes perfect sense. Humility is trusting the Tao. In other words, let go of all that. Whatever you think, whatever you believe to be true, all your experiences, judgments, expectations. Ooh, feels good just to say that. And allow the Tao to just flow. So it, for me, goes along with detachment. If I'm not attached to anything, I don't need to defend anything. If I'm trusting a higher power of some sort, whatever that looks like, I like to call it Gus, Great Universal Spirit, then, that's humility though. That's a good definition of humility for me, guys, because the humble and obey, those words kind of like fingernails on chalkboard. So this is it resonates with me, this definition of humility and the juxtaposition of trusting and defending, that they are opposites in a way, is very helpful. It just inspires me to continue doing that because that is the way that's most calm. And I like that. I know we'll get to the next section, but that whole idea that the stillness is the goal and the calm serenity is the outcome of trusting. Woohoo, good stuff.
Thank you, Lori.
Yeah, I'll take this book with me.
It doesn't say they never get defensive, but there's no need to be defensive.
Mm-hmm.
How much of my energy is wasted on defense that's not needed?
Planning for an attack.
Yes. Waiting on the other
Waiting on
shoe to
it.
drop, Brian.
Waiting on the other shoe to drop. Waiting on everything to, quote, go to shit.
Pulling a Eeyore.
Yeah. I don't know if I've shared this, but my dad, he had a famous quote, and he was usually buzzed and screaming, but he would say, one of these days, everything's going to go to shit. And for a long time, I would hear things on the news, on the radio, and I would think, here it goes. The Dow's down. The DOW is down 500 points. This is it. It's here. Constant fear.
Yeah, I like the way y'all put it. If I'm trusting and walking humbly, there's no reason for me to defend. Why waste my energy on defense? Second stanza. A great nation's like a great man. When he makes a mistake, he realizes it. Having realized it, he admits it. Is that not the surrender? Is that not the...
Which step is that? I'm drawing a blank.
That's the surrender process. And I was thinking about it in association with 6 and 7. 10, 11, 12 is ongoing, but you could say it was 10th step or 4th step, and all the others mixed in there when you're admitting and correcting and those things. I was thinking about it, though, in regards to the first stanza about the streams running downward into the greater body of water. Let's say the ocean's the greater body of water. We don't impede that flow, do we? There's nothing that would impede the flow of life within me defending a mistake, right? Or entertaining my fears, allowing selfishness, dishonesty, and resentment to remain in my life, which are usually, or every time that I've seen, protecting a fear, trying to, some kind of fear that's there that I don't want to surrender to. Brian?
Buddy, what comes up for me, I can remember before I got into recovery, I would literally have a thought of maybe I was a little harsh. Maybe I wasn't 100% correct, but the person still somehow deserved it. It did them good. They deserved it. And man, I just couldn't let go of that and just admit that I was wrong. And it's taken a lot of work to get to that place, but I'm thankful I'm there. I'm not perfect, but I'm a hell of a lot better than I was. Thanks.
It's the first of that process is realizing it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I used to not realize it. I didn't know. That's what recovery's brought for me in a more of a spiritual way of life, is that I'm beginning to see things that I couldn't see before. The 12th step talks about that having had a spiritual awakening as the result of
these steps.
The awakening just wakes me up to what's going on that I couldn't see before. I think we're always in a phase of that awakening. I honestly don't know anyone that I think is fully awake, but I know some that are much more awake than I am, that's for sure. He considers, here's our line, Drew. He considers those who point out his faults as assholes that should keep their mouth shut. No. That's what I always thought, and sometimes I wish they'd just shut up.
You need to learn a lesson.
Yes. Here, let me teach you a lesson. This is the thing. The one pointing it out, Brian, could be doing it not from a good place.
Mm-hmm.
But yet, even though there may be fully egotistical, fully full of fear, full all those things, but yet they're pointing out our mistake. How does it say? Faults, not mistakes, faults. Who point out his faults. It's not about the person pointing it out. It's still about you. They shouldn't pick on me that well. Was it a fault? Maybe it's something. What's your part? Maybe you surrendered this fault, worked the program on it. Would they have that to point out? See? Those who point out his faults as his most benevolent teachers, his most giving teachers.
Like a sponsor.
Yep. A sponsor, most of the time, is coming from a good place. This doesn't mean they're coming from a good place.
Yeah.
It even applies. The only requirement for this is that they're pointing out our fault.
Yeah.
And that is so hard to hear that from someone who's coming from an egotistical point of view that's pointing out a real fault of ours, which does happen. First thing I want to do is go ahead, Drew.
Just saying, it says no matter where they are coming from, even if you know that they're coming from a bad place, you still consider them to be benevolent.
Yes. Most benevolent teachers, not just
most benevolent. Even if they're coming at it from a selfish place or
attacking you, but if they're pointing out a real fault, now if they're attacking you without something that's not real, that's a different story. But
sounds like not picking up that rope, just listening.
Thank you. I have no complaint whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
I had a sponsee we were talking about. He said, wouldn't it be nice if you went onto Facebook and these people who are sharing shit that you have no desire to hear, just thank you for sharing your opinion. I appreciate you sharing your opinion today. Thank you. I said,
and watch it melt.
There yet.
Watch it melt down.
Yeah. But,
so this is perfect timing
yes.
Perfect timing for my trip back to my hometown, because obviously I don't agree with everything everyone says, or what I think it's so funny. What did you say a second ago? You were talking about creating the enemy in advance and spending all this time weaving all these imaginative, fanciful flights of insanity that's going to happen possibly. And holy crap, I can take you down. It takes me down a road of not calm, not still, not serene. This just once again reinforces perfect timing that I have the I have the tools. I have a wee bit of maturity to just shut up and listen, right? And say thank you and not be defensive and not take it personally and say, and then just be quiet to all my relatives and friends who mean, yeah, there's a reason I live in New York.
The best they can do, Lord. It's the best they can do.
That's it. Yep. Yeah. And I love that. Can I read yours, buddy?
Sure.
All right. Verse 61 from Powerless, Not Helpless. The farther we progress on this path, the more our ego diminishes, like rivers flowing to the ocean. The greater the body of water, the more it continually gives back to the world. Through experience, we find the more humble our walk, the more grace we attract. The more grace we attract, the greater our spiritual awareness. The greater our spiritual awareness, the more we're able to give back to those around us. Nice.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
He thinks of his enemy as that asshole that pointed out my faults. No. He thinks of his enemy as the shadow that he himself casts.
Sounds like to me that when you get a resentment against somebody, it's like, what do I see in them that I recognize in myself?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for everything.
I have no complaint
whatsoever. There's another Tao quote that talks about one of the greatest mishaps is to have an enemy. It says it better than that. Let me find it real quick. No greater misfortune, verse 46. No greater, I'll read the whole little stanza. The Stephen Mitchell, verse 46. There is no greater illusion than fear. No greater wrong than preparing to defend yourself. No greater misfortune than having an enemy. Whoever can see through all fear will always be safe. No greater misfortune than having an enemy. So back to our verse 61, if he thinks of his enemy as the shadow that he himself casts, he has no enemy. If you have no enemy, there's nothing to defend. So walking this way of life is what removes the illusion of needing defense. And I'm not talking about, hypothetical situations. What I think this is talking about is in our personal everyday life, where in the past for everything I thought, I would have a defense of why I think that, or why I did this, or whatever the case. I had all these defenses built up. I can't recall anything I really defend now. If I don't, this is a good example. And we had this come up in our Zen group. I have a Zen study group. We were talking about it wasn't a long conversation, but the conversation was about, I brought up how we could allow people to have room for their own beliefs, their own ideas of higher power, all those things, and that no one's idea is wrong. And I firmly believe if you're talking about a loving God in some form or a form of love, I think everyone's where they are. I certainly don't need to judge what they think. Who am I to judge anybody regardless of what they think? And they couldn't quite get what I was talking about. But my defense, I no longer defend what I believe or think. I very rarely talk about it. That's one of the great things about 12 step is that when you come in, I was told, you have to have a belief in a higher power of some type. Most people do to get sober. You have to have it. It's most important, but we're not going to tell you what that belief should be. That's odd, isn't it? Church was the opposite. They said, this is what we believe. Now that's what you're supposed to believe. If you believe something different, then
Go next door.
yeah. So even if there's a damnation message with that, that's not for me to judge. Who am I? Who put me in charge of what anyone else believes about anything? If you get into like something really weird, you've got laws to protect people. I'm going to talk about that. Just basic belief, they can believe whatever they want to believe. That's up to them. It's not up to me. So if I'm not attacking people for what or judging, I certainly don't have reason to defend. Someone will say, I don't believe that's right. Okay. Doesn't matter to me. I remember having these conversations with my son. But I said, okay, you don't have to agree with me. It doesn't matter. But that's just not, he'd want to fight about it. I'm like, no, you're not going to get a fight here. You can believe everything I think is BS is fine. I don't care. That just takes the defense out, doesn't it? That takes the whole error out of the whole thing.
I think that goes back to and speaks to trust, because I trust his higher power to take care of it. Mm-hmm. And I don't need to. There's so much freedom in that. Ooh. I can let go of control, fixing, manipulating, convincing, arguing. Oof. All that stuff can just go out the window.
There's no need for any of that, Lori.
There's no need for any of that. It's a beautiful thing. It's wonderful.
And it was a long time before. That's been only recently, I'd say in the last, I don't know, few years. And then I realized, we've talked about this before, that I look at it now as everyone has their own God language, so to speak. So everyone is speaking their language. It's like you having a native tongue that's different than mine doesn't mean you're speaking the wrong language because you don't speak what I speak. But we do that all the time with spiritual things. So I can say the Lord's Prayer at the end of the meeting with the group because we're using a common tongue, a common God language. So I can say that when I don't think God is up in the sky anymore. I don't think I could, because I could just put so many, I don't go all the way down through. I said, wait a minute. Why am I fighting this? Why don't I join in? We can do this in a different language, and I don't have to be offended about it. I don't have to judge it in some way. Me standing there and not praying the Lord's Prayer was judging it. In a way, it was judging. I was saying this isn't right. But I could change that because, it's just another language. It means the same thing. It's just a little different. It's the blind men and the elephant. Y'all know that story, right? The blind men are around the elephant, and they ask to describe the elephant. One describes a trunk, and they describe these different parts, and nothing sounds the same, but yet they're all describing the same animal. And I think our description, so to speak, of the higher power the same way. We're seeing just from a little different view. And the further we go up this mountain of spirituality, the more the paths look similar. The further up we go, the more similar they look. If a nation... go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, the first bit of that stanza is just step 4 through 9, or step 10. When he makes a mistake, he realizes it. That takes the awareness of doing the step 4 work. Having realized it, he admits it. That's step 5. And then having admitted it, he corrects it, turns it over, and makes amends. I was just looking that over and thinking, boom.
Sure is.
I know, thinking about when I do get defensive, what's going on with me? Why am I getting defensive? And usually it's because somebody pointed out a fault, or somebody told me something I did wrong, or disagrees with me about something. And that just gets my mind going. That gets me agitated, gets me, I don't like knowing that I did something incorrectly or something like that. And the defensiveness is, the purpose of it for me is to calm that all down. I know I'm right. I know the other person is wrong. That helps me be calmer. But in reality, that's not how it works. The more defensive I get, the more agitated I get, the more fuel I put on the fire. And when I hear something I did wrong, when I learn about a misperception I have, and I take that to heart, I realize it, I apologize, I learn from it, that's when I feel the calmest. That's when I feel the strongest, is when somebody tells me I did something wrong, somebody tells me I hurt them, even if I didn't mean to, even if I had good intentions. If I can apologize for it and talk with them about it, then that's what gets me to where I thought that defending myself would get me. That's what gets me feeling peaceful. That's what gets me feeling, more connected. That's what gets me feeling strong. Not being right, but admitting that I was wrong. And that's, like you said, buddy, that's something that's taken me years and years to realize. I'm not fully there yet, but that is one thing that I'm learning about myself.
When I humble myself, which is what that process is, the mistake process there is humility. That is laying down my defenses in itself. When I make a mistake, I realize it, realizing I admit it, having admitted it, I correct it. That is one of the processes that actually brings humility about. Okay, last stanza. If a nation's centered on the Tao, if it nourishes its own people and doesn't meddle in the affairs of others, that's a lot. It will be a light to all nations in the world. If I am centered on the Tao, if I practice compassionate living, if I learn how to walk in love, ever how you want to say it, I had a new phrase the last couple of days. I think it was an intention of helpfulness. I like the way that sounded. Attitude of gratitude. That's a big one in recovery. All of that is centering myself on the Tao. You could think of the Tao as God or love or ever how you look at that. Or you could even think of it as the moment. Some people think now is another 3-letter word for God, which makes sense to me. Centered on the Tao nourishes itself. And I don't meddle in the affairs of others. Or you could even say, if I'm doing that, I'm nourishing others and I don't meddle in their affairs. Could say it that way. That'd probably be better. That I'm not only a light to those around me, but for anyone in the world. Interesting thing about a light just shines. It's up to whoever can see the light to remove obstructions. The light, like a light on a hill, like in some of your Bible texts. Light on a hill cannot be hid. If you look at it that way, the opus is on the person seeing the light. If the light's just shining, all it's them shining. And how one receives it's up to them. So I think it's a lot the same as the needing of defense. When I start defending, I start blocking that light. I can't see it as clearly. Not
one metaphor this last stanza reminds me of is when you're on an airplane, they tell you if the oxygen masks drop down, put on your own mask first before trying to help others. Nourishing its own people. That's what that reminds me of, is get your own oxygen mask on. If you see all the oxygen masks drop, don't look around and tell people what they're doing wrong and you need to put it on this way and you need to put it on that way. Because you're not going to be much help in that situation, and you're not going to be able to help for very long because you need your own oxygen. So get your own mask on, and then you can start helping people.
Thank you, Drew. And my other takeaway from this is the way I look at those who point out my faults. Am I really looking at them as a teacher, or am I looking at them as someone who I need to defend against? That's a tough one. That's a tough one. And ultimately, we can see that it just says, it doesn't say he has an enemy. He thinks of his enemy as the shadow that he himself casts. So ultimately, no enemy other than the faults that he presents in his life. So it's back to us again, right? Everything comes back. Everything, which is great because there's no way I can surrender you, but I have the possibility of surrendering me. So the fact that it's about changing me is great. Doesn't mean I need to beat myself up. It just means that, yeah, I know a way now to deal with those things through the tools I learn in recovery.
Buddy, it's like that moment you realize the world's not against you, but you were against the world.
Yes.
Brian's the problem in Brian's life.
And that's not a bad thing, Brian. It's not like we're beating you up.
No.
It's not the you're worthless piece of shit, blah, blah, blah. That's not what we're saying. We're saying that, hey, there's some work to do here.
Yeah.
And guess what? It's possible. You don't have to be alone. You can have a life greater than anything you ever imagined. You're not at the mercy of others anymore. That's the gift.
Mm-hmm.
That there's no one out there that's really pressing you under their thumb. There is no enemy out there. I think that's the message of hope out of this verse. If you choose to, the enemy's an illusion. I started seeing that through the steps of the program. If you're in recovery, and I would suggest if it hasn't worked for you or you're lacking some of what we're talking about, I went to a meeting, I got a sponsor, and I started doing what the sponsor suggested that I do. And my life got better. I would suggest the same for anyone who is having difficulty backing all the ways that we try. My issue was alcohol and all the ways I tried to stop drinking. And I didn't come to AA on a winning streak. I didn't say, oh, let's see. Do I want to renew my country club membership or join AA? I think I'll just join AA. Yeah, maybe I've achieved it. No, it wasn't that at all.
It's only $1 a meeting.
Yeah. Yeah. I came to AA because there's nowhere else for me to go. I was, as we would say here, tore up from the floor up. It was awful. I had nowhere else to go. Nowhere else. And so I eventually surrendered and the program started working for me. But I saw someone who had what I wanted. I asked them to sponsor me. We started working the steps. And if you're not marrying the person, if you ask someone to be your sponsor, then you realize you don't mesh, there's no problem with getting another sponsor. You could even say, would you be my temporary sponsor? And then with time, if you stay with them, they're no longer your temporary. You don't have to. There's not designation. You don't get a card saying, oh, now they're my real sponsor. None of that stuff, That keeps it a little more casual so that if you do decide to go with another sponsor, it's not as difficult making a switch, maybe. People who sponsor understand that. There's no one. If you sponsor long enough, you're going to have someone, they call it firing you, but you're going to have people say they want to get another sponsor. I guess it would be firing. And then you end up firing sponsees. It happens. It happens. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's just a process. Good stuff. Anything else, guys? Been a good conversation today. Thank you. You know what I don't like about ones like this that have this real application? I end up with opportunities to practice. This is one I do not like to practice. So hopefully I won't need many opportunities this week to have faults pointed out. Oh, thank you for pointing out my fault. You're my greatest teacher. Thank you so much. I usually don't think that in my head.
Going to
Walmart
today?
Maybe one. No, actually, I am. We got a cookout tomorrow, so I've got to go this evening. And I've got to go back right before Labor Day. I have found that if you go to Walmart the day before a holiday on the evening, they mark down all their meat that they thought they would sell that they haven't sold. So I buy all my steaks for the next few months on the day before the holiday. So I got to go stock up next week. But I do have to go today, Brian. I'm trying to not let faults arrive, so I have to deal with that while I'm there.
We'll burn a candle till you return.
Oh, please. Yes. Thank you so much. Well, you guys, y'all have a great week, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Hello, this is Buddy C. I wanted to make you aware of several recovery-related resources that I've posted in the episode description. These resources include a list of recovery podcasts, a free sober meditation app, daily recovery email, shared Google recovery calendars. Hope you put some of these resources to use and have a great week.
Thank you for listening to the Tao of Our Understanding Recovery Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends in recovery.